Since it's a Harvard day, I'll give my brief Harvard history. Is just what Gavin was talking about. Of course, I got it on the other side of the ledger where I was a student at Harvard. My first flight in Harvard, my first experience, I've been in a Piper Cup for prior to this. My first real experience flying was on an ATC flying scholarship. On the 13th of January 1969, I've got to say I was very young, in Harvard 1091, and that was with Flight Lieutenant Larry Olson. And then that must have sown the seed, so I ended up joining the Air Force on number 170, obviously 1970 Wings Force. And my first solo in Harvard was in 1098, which is still around Ardmore here, owned by Ace Edwards. That was on the 17th of April 1970. My last Air Force flight in Harvard was on the 18th of March 1971 in 1099, and that was the end of our Wings Course before we went on to do bigger and better things. And then I got back into Harvarding. The next flight in Harvard was the 11th of May 1999, so 28 years later, and that was in Harvard 1057 when I did a reefer build with Trevor Blanton. That is the start of my Harvard genesis. And I should have left it there, but I didn't. When I joined Air New Zealand in 1986, my instructor on the friendship was one Keith Skilling. And he said, Frank, have I got a deal for you? We've got a syndicate together, we're going to rebuild this harbour. And I can tell you, it's going to be ready in 18 months for the next Wanaka. We've priced it out to the last dollar, it's going to be $165,000. And we've got a space for you, my boy. And I'm thinking, well, here's my instructor on the apprenticeship, and this could be a bonus here. Anyway, I joined him. And the deal was I had to come up with, I can't remember how many $1,000 and so much per month while the project was going. So remember, it was going to be ready in 18 months and $165,000. In reality, it took 6 years and $365,000. So the moral of the story is, if you get to a Harvard project, make sure you've got big pockets. However, that was sort of a watershed for me getting into that aircraft. And it first learned about 2000, and I was just sort of ticking by, getting a bit of experience up in it. And about 2002, Gavin Trethewey came along, tapped me on the shoulder, he says, Frank, I've got a deal for you. I'm trying to put together a formation team, and I know that you've learned in the Air Force Air Trainer Formation Team, and I've seen you flying at Harvard. I've got just a spot for you. And so I started my association, I guess, with the Roaring Forties, which I finally almost got out of last year by handing the baton over to Dave Brown. As I was flying around in this old harbour thing, there's my partner at the time, Liz Neal. Liz is a pretty well-known aviatrix. She started showing a little bit of interest. And so eventually she agreed to go for a fly with me. I think she said, I'm not going flying that thing with you until you've done 20 hours of it. So for 20 hours came up and says, come here, young lady, and off we went flying. Well, that piqued her interest, and within a year or two she had bought to Harvard Syndicate. She bought to Harvard 65. And through a number of events, I'm not sure how it happened, but I ended up with Harvard 65, which was a bit of an old dog, and she ended up with Harvard 57, which was Queen of the Fleet. That's the way these things go, isn't it? Getting into the harbour got me, really opened the gateway for me through a lot of luck, I guess, and being in the right place at the right time, into a few other exotic aircraft. In, I can't remember the date, but maybe 2005 or so. In fact, it was just after 9/11, whenever that was, and the insurance rates skyrocketed. And Garth Hogan, who had a big keyhawk at the time, was faced with this humongous insurance bill. He thought, crap, I've got to sort this out. So he made it be known that if you met Garth's rather stringent requirements, you might be able to go flying in his keyhawk. And so I can recall at the Aero Club bar one evening, sidling up to Garth, who I knew slightly, and I said, Garth, I hear interested in any people fly your kitty hawk? He says, yeah, so what? Anyway, after a little bit of discussion, he said, oh, yeah, well, let me think about it. And a little bit down the track, I got to do some flying in this kitty hawk, courtesy of John Lamont. And then I used to be able to fly the kitty hawk on special occasions. On the Garth was a taskmaster, and he had a very nice aircraft, so quite right where he was. And I've got a range of Garth, and the weather was suitable, and everything else. He'd say, yeah, you can take a fly, but let me know when you're finished. And so I'd take it out, put it back together and polish it. Yeah, that's right. And then one day he said, oh, Frank, he said, I've got this guy for a ride. I'm a bit busy. You take this guy for a ride in a kitty hawk. So I did that. And then another ride, and suddenly, instead of me paying Garth $2,500 an hour to fly his aeroplane, I could do it for nothing. What a wonderful situation. And then through Pioneer Restoration, so we're doing a Yak 3 rebuild on behalf of Ray Hanna. And so I had this aircraft all set to go, and the CAA said it's got to do 10 hours test flight. And the big boys, John Lamont and co, they were all busy, and John Lamont Tesla, he said, oh, look, I've got to get back to doing what I'm doing. And so Garth said, oh, can you put a few hours on this thing for me, please? I said, oh, let me think about this. So we did. And so suddenly, Frankie gets his backside on the Yak 3 to zip around the sky. And we have a pretty stringent test flight program to follow, but how lucky do you get? And then I guess the big break came when Doug Brooker bought a Spitfire, and I was CFI at Warbirds. And Doug says, look, he says, how would you feel about flying my Spitfire? I had to think about that for a little while. And I said, why would you do that? He said, well, it's reasonable that the CFI Warbirds should be able to fly this aeroplane. And so that happened, and then subsequently it was being set up in Part 115 flying, which is adventure aviation. So when I can keep Liz out of it, I get to fly a Spitfire on a regular occasion. Another lucky break was when the people down there, Mark, got a Foxhawk 190 replica down there, and they were looking for somebody to test fly. And they originally approached John Lamont, and John, fortunately for me, there's a P40C being rebuilt up here. And John said, oh, look, I'm busy with the P40, I might be able to get back to that thing. And in the interim, they came on me and said, Frank, how would you like to fly this Foxhawk, Frank? Had to think about that for a little bit as well. And so these things just happen. Been right place, right time, and so on and on it goes. About 1916, I was approached by a gentleman, Mr. Reg Field, who had been for a fly in a strike master over the other side of the airfield on an adventure flight, and Reg had always been interested in aeroplanes, but he'd never had anything serious to do with them. And he found Warbirds over here and come and talk to us and got introduced to myself. And Reg says, you guys need some World War I aeroplanes. I said, yeah, but they're sort of specialised sorts of things. And he says, look, 2 years, it's the 100 years of the armistice. You've got to have a World War I aeroplane to fly up that. And so we discussed this, and the decision, we ended up deciding, or Reg says, I'll tell you what, I'll buy 2 aircraft if you guys get together and buy one. And so long story short, we did an agreement to purchase from the vintage Avian Limited 3 aircraft. There's going to be a BE-2, a Sopwith Pup, which is the one that we were going to buy because it was the cheapest, and an Albatross fighter. And long story short, and beyond the scope of this audience, is we ended up getting the BE-2 in the corner, which I'll talk about shortly, and then, shall I call it internal discord in the vintage Avian Limited, the other 2 aircraft were ready to be test flown, ready to pick up, but were never delivered. And so that was a little bit unfortunate, we could say. After the Pup and Albatross, we couldn't take delivery of them, I was in discussion with some gentleman in Florida, and he had a replica Fokker triplane and a replica Sopwith Camel for sale. And that was going down the line, and then it sort of fell off the rails as well. And about that time was Graham Wolf, and I'm sure some of you know, at Classic Sales, Classic Fighters, Classic everything else, no market, he approached me and says, I hear you guys are looking for a Fokker triplane. I says, well, yeah, we are indeed, but we were chasing one and it's fallen out. He said, oh, well, I've got one for sale. And so the little black aeroplane arrived. So now we have two, a goodie and a baddie. And then shortly after, months after actually, Graham came to me and says, look, he says, I understand that the T-valve stuff's gone down to Googler, so maybe we can help you with a Bristol fighter. I says, what? He says, a Bristol fighter, he says, a very unrepresented aircraft. And so not Bristol fighter, Bristol Scout. So then we ended up with a little yellow jockey just at the back there. And I'll talk about this a little bit further as well. And then down track somewhat, Graham came back and he says, I've got just what you need, it's a Seaman shooter. I said, oh, what? And so, long story short, we ended up with this one over here. And so, we've actually done pretty well out of all this. And what I said is, this gentleman, Reg, is he's basically funded all these aircraft for us. And his deal is, he will provide the aircraft, and it's up to New Zealand Warbirds to make them work. And then the final one came along is one of our members came and he says, have you seen this? And it was this picture of this thing called an albatross that had been built in Canada. He says it's for sale. And I had a look at the sale prices and I forget it. Anyway, I contacted the gentleman who was selling it, and that's it now, so back there. So that's how New Zealand Warbirds came about World War I collection. Listen, I'll just talk about each aircraft as we go. You probably stand up, turn around, do whatever you like. In the back is the BE2. The BE stands for, most of what I'm telling you is what I've read, and Wikipedia is a wonderful thing. So if there's any errors in it, it's Wikipedia, not me. BE2 stands for Blériot Experimental. All that means is that the propellers at the front, not at the back, because Blériot put his propellers at the front of his aeroplane, but a lot of other people want to put the propellers at the back. Maybe they were thinking of jet propulsion, I don't know. The BE2 is one of the first aircraft that the military got, and I see it as it's an aeroplane that was designed and built for the military, but the military didn't really know what they wanted aeroplanes for. And so it was designed as an observation platform, and that's what it does. It was served throughout World War I. It was the first aeroplanes that the Brits sent to Europe in World War I. And they obviously used it for observation. Obviously, you can fly around and look over the fence and see what the other guys are up to. You sort of got a little bit of a yardstick on it. It hadn't been there a long time when the other guys came up with these little single-seater things and started shooting them down. And they were losing so many BE2s that it became cause for concern in the House of Commons. And so they had to withdraw them out of the front line. Nonetheless, they continued throughout the war. They were used in Blighty for coastal surveillance by the Royal Naval Air Service. They were used to shoot down Zeppelins at night time. And the guy on the back wall, the Darth Brandon, is a Kiwi who shot down a Zeppelin over London at 10,000 feet. Now, the fact that they could send a BE2 up and shoot down or they actually bombed them with little bomber things, Zeppelins, stopped the Germans from bombing London during World War I. Because the Zeppelins are a huge capital expense. It was probably the cost of the battleship. And these things you get knocked down out of the sky, well, it just wasn't cricket, was it? The Australians operated Bristol Scouts and BE2s in Palestine. And BE2 is recorded as probably doing the first ever casualty evacuation, where it picked up a chap from the side of the road in Palestine who'd been shot up or whatever and flew him back to the hospital. So it's a very important aeroplane. Coming forward to the Bristol Scout, it was designed about the same time, around 1912, 1913. The Scout was designed for a race around England, not around England, but a race in England. And with good British weather, on the day of the race, it was rubbish, so it didn't take part. However, the military got hold of them, and it was one of the first single-seaters that the military got involved with. This one is unarmed, but back in the day, is the pilots would put a Lewis gun either pointing out the side so it missed the propeller, across the top of the wing so it missed the propeller, or in fact they put the power rail to the fuselage and shot through the propeller without interrupting it. And they figured that they could shoot 2 magazines through their Lewis gun without doing irreparable damage to the propeller. I should mention the VE2 is the other famous thing about the aeroplanes. The first VC in the air was run by a guy flying the VE2. It's a guy with a New Zealand connection, and that his forefathers were early settlers in Wellington and Canterbury, and his mother was part Maori. Long story, but he was brought up in England, and he learned to fly himself prior to the war, joined the Royal Flying Corps, and was flying VE2s. The Germans were on advance, and they wanted to bomb a railway yard to try and slow them down. So he was sent out as VE2 with a handful of bombs to bomb the railway yard, which he did. And he went at reasonably low level, so he hit the target and was shot up quite badly by ground fire. And unfortunately, he stayed back to his airfield and died the next day. So it was the first VC won in the air. The second VC won in the air was a guy flying a Bristol Scout. Or the first VC in a single-seater aeroplane was a guy flying a Bristol Scout. It was Lano Hawker. And he got involved in an engagement with some German aircraft. He shot down 3 of them and chased 2 more away. And for that was awarded the VC. Unfortunately, he also became the Red Baron's 11th victim. So, the Scout was replaced really by the Sopwith Pup in about 1917. So it saw early service, and then it was withdrawn as a training type aircraft. It was flown by many notable worldwide pilots. Ardmore, who was one of the celebrated British aces, he had his own personal Scout in the squadron, and various others. So, this one here, it's a replica. VE2 we call reproduction. It's built by a vintage A-Gable, and it's totally accurate. Everything about it is so accurate that it could have rolled off the production line 100 years ago. The Scout looks the part, but it's actually built with a few slightly modern things about it. So it's not a reproduction, it's a replica, but it's a very accurate one. The engine in it is an original rotary engine, and it's stamped 1919, and it still goes beautifully. That's the little Scout. The black one in the back, Fokker triplane. Courtesy of the Snoopy comics, most people think that the only aeroplanes the Germans flew in World War I were Fokker triplanes. But in fact, it was not a very successful aeroplane. It was a copy from the Sopwith triplane. The German saw it and said, oh, that's pretty good, it goes pretty well, we better have some of those. So they knocked it up. It had teething problems and that the wings fell off, which is sort of typical. It only saw about 7 months frontline service, and they only built 700 of them. So, although we have this aura of the Fokker triplane being the aeroplane, it's actually just one of the aeroplanes. Next around, the Albatross was one of the aeroplanes. The Albatross was produced right through World War I. Started off with a Mark 1 or D1 and worked their way through a D5A, which is what this one is. It's as things improved, engines improved and ideas improved, they so modified the aircraft and modernised it. One of the problems of the D5 is, in a bid to make it go faster, they wanted to put a smaller wing on the bottom. So they went from a twin-spar wing to a single-spar wing. And these things started falling out of the sky and explained. And it wasn't until one of the pilots came back and described how the wings started fluttering quite badly that the aerodynamicists discovered aerodynamic flutter. And what was happening is they were going too fast. The wings would start to flex and flutter and fall off. And once again, that was most unhealthy. So the little struts at the front of the interwing struts there was put on to try and stop that happening. The early Albatross had 140 horsepower and it had a big straight six-cylinder Mercedes diesel in it, not the Mercedes engine in it. The later ones, they were getting up to 180 horsepower, so over the period of development they went from 140 to 180 horsepower, which is quite an increase. The Germans built 2,700 plus of them, so it was one of the main aircraft that the Germans had in World War I. Now across to the beauty of the corner. It's a Siemens Schucker. It was built by a company called Siemens Schucker Werk. So it's basically SSW. The genesis of this SSW was in 1917, the French had the Newport 17, which was a very successful aeroplane. And the German said, we need some of those. So they captured one and gave it to Mr. Siemens, says, build some of these with it. And so they did. They built the SSB-1. And by the time it reached the front line, it was sort of superseded. It had become not so good. And so they developed it. And this is the last development that they did. It was, which is the B4. They hadn't got to the front line in mid-1918, and they only built about 200 of them. The SSW B3, they built a lot of them. And it's quite well known, but this one is pretty much unknown. The Allies got hold of it after the war and flew it, and they were staggered by its performance. It had a contra-rotating rotary engine in it. Anybody know what a rotary engine is? Anybody don't know what a rotary engine is? Rotary engine is I'm not sure how to develop it. The crankshaft is fixed to the aeroplane and the whole engine on the propeller turns around. So the whole engine is rotating. I'll show you in a minute. They did this for various reasons. They had the idea that they cooling for the engine. They had the idea that the engine would act as a flywheel and therefore give a much smoother power. It had a few drawbacks. One was the induction system, which has to come in through a hollow crankshaft through the crankcase out to the cylinders. It had an oil system which is a total loss because they pump oil into the main bearings and what have you, and then it's got nowhere to go except it finds its way outside the exhaust pipe or the exhaust holes as it is. And so you go flying in that thing for 20 minutes. And it's got about 2 litres of oil to wipe off it, because that's where the oil goes. The engines were developed significantly during World War I, and they ended up getting maximum power of about 220 horsepower out of it, and then they've reached their limit. One of the problems is because of the induction system, you just can't get air into it. And so the more power you try and get out of it, it just means you lose what we call volumetric efficiency. And so that's it. The end of the World War I was the end of the rotary engine. And somebody put their head together and thought, why don't we fix the engine and turn the crankshaft? Which gets us to the aeroplane in the back, which is one of the very early development radial engines. That's a polycarbonate PO2. It's an actual genuine aircraft, which I think came from Ukraine. The Russians designed that in about the 1920s as a training aeroplane. So we had the Tiger off, and they went twice as big as built PO2. It was built to replace, at that time the Russians for their training aircraft had DH-104s, no, what's the 104? Old rotary engine continuum. And so it was quite a step forward for them. It comes along the Great Patriotic War, and they found a few other uses for it. They obviously used it for training. They used it for liaison, flying around the battlefield. They used it at night time for bombing over the German lines, and if everybody's interested, Google Night Witches, which was a group or a squadron or a unit of Russian women who flew exclusively in those aeroplanes, and they went out at night time over the German lines, dropping bombs over the side. They didn't do much damage, but they kept the Germans awake and really pissed them off, so quite effective. They used it for air ambulance. They put a sort of a hatchback on the back, and they could fit 3 islands down the back to fly back to the hospital. Post-war, they used them for everything, for agriculture, and I think they were in production until the 1950s. The amazing thing is the Russians and their allies built over 30,000 of them, which is amazing. The most built aeroplane is a toss-up between the Russian Stormovic and the Mis-9. They talk about 36,000 of those. They built 30,000 of those aeroplanes, is, I think, quite amazing. So that's the Warbirds World War I and other collection. And since one thinks Harvard, I should talk about our little trophy in the corner here. I'm sure most of you have heard of John Smith of Marpur, who recently passed away. John Smith was an avid aviation collector, and Warbirds were invited by the people who were sorting out his stuff, shall I say, to come and collect a whole bunch of Harvard stuff. And amongst it was this aeroplane here, which is quite historic. It's Harvard 909, which is the first group of Harvard aircraft that were delivered to the Air Force. And so I guess it's 901, it flew 80 years ago, isn't it? So it's 909. I think there was 10 of them. There's that one and possibly the bones of one other remain. Yeah. So there's about 3 or 4 of them were written off during World War II. There were no training. What was left, I think, particularly got broken up there, and so there's this one here. Now, unbelievably, and I told you the little story about Harvard 57, what a wonderful opportunity it was to get involved in. We're talking about rebuilding that. But what we're talking to is the people at Terror, that classic flyers, have done a number of rebuilding projects on Avengers and all sorts of stuff. And they think they're now up to the task of rebuilding Flying Harbour. They've got a great bunch of people there who can do all, I mean, it's really just drilling bricks out and putting them back in, isn't it? Can't be that hard. But they've got a bunch of people who they think will go up to the job. They've got a couple of engineers, licensed engineers, who are willing to oversee it. And our plan is to get together with them. They've got a trust down there, I think it's the Bay of Plenty Historic Aircraft Trust or something of that kin. We've got a trust up here, which is New Zealand Aviation Heritage Trust, and the end product will be jointly owned by these two trusts, and the aircraft will be shared between Tara and me. That's our vision. We've got what we see there. We've got the bones of another Harvard, which is the Harvard 1100, which has been partially rebuilt in bits and pieces, and we've got lots of other stuff. And so, hopefully, the guys in Tara are putting 3 years on. I think I'll be lucky to fly it, but hopefully we'll get that aeroplane flying again, and if we can achieve that, it's going to be a rather historic aeroplane. We'll be asking for donations as well. That's all for me, folks. Any questions?
Frank, propeller rotation, all about the same era. Why some go clockwise and others chose to go the other way?
So
propeller rotation.
So the question is, why do some propellers go one way and why do some go the other way?
Yeah, it's just that they're looking over each other's plans all the time. Why did some go the other way?
Because they can, I guess, it's true. So I've got no idea.
Because there's the world and there's Americans.
I'm a helicopter person as well. And they do the same thing. The Americans go this way and everybody else goes that way. And I guess there's no good reason for it. And it's interesting, Spitfire, the Merlin Spitfire goes one way and Griffin Spitfire goes the other way. Why? Have you got a good reason for it, Bill? Just the way it is. Yeah. So, any other questions?
What about the two lines?
Oh, two Ryans. We're at two Ryans. So we've got two Ryans in the association. One's a Ryan STM, which is actually owned by Motac. And it's been with Warbirds through an agreement with Motac for many, many years. Both of them just down the handy down the road because it makes some room in here. The STM's been out in the air for some time. There's the original Nasco engine in it. We bought many years ago, so it was replaced with a long engine from Czechoslovakia. And unfortunately, the long engine had a problem as well. and we're just about to get it running in there. For the technically minded, there's a little plug in here with a gadget pin which came out and stored the core and created the metal and blah 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 blah. And we had trouble getting spare parts for it. First of all, we had trouble finding anybody who knew anything about it and getting spare parts. And the spare parts had to come from somewhere east of Poland, and then COVID came along, and then we got lost. So we've spent the last 18 months trying to find a new piston, a new cylinder barrel. That's all happened. The other one, the PT22, which is the little training version, it's just down the road there. They're both hawks, yeah, both flying. Yeah. That's what we like to think is unique about warbirds, and we've got 2 aeroplanes about flying. It's a Skyhawk and a Mackie. Anything else?
Are you looking at getting any more World War I stuff, or you keep adding to the collection of World War I?
Well, we actually feature World War I. The hangar's pretty full back. and the problem with these aeroplanes, they cost us a lot of money, is all the aeroplanes in the hangar here pay around $600 a month hangarage. And it's easy when you've got an aeroplane that's syndicated because you've got 20 people who pop up with $30 each a month and it's no problem. Whereas these, there's nothing to support. They cost us insurance, I think it's about 30 grand a year. So a lovely collection of World War I aeroplanes plus maintenance, they cost somebody in the region of $80,000 a year. So we've got to be circumspect about that. I would like another 3 hangars down here, but not going to happen this week.
Having flown so many different types, what's your favourite? From, you know, almost all eras.
It depends which owner is closest. Let me see. The World War I stuff is I mean, it's the beginning of aviation. And B-2, you fly the B-2, it's underpowered, it looks like a butterfly and it flies like a butterfly. It's got ailerons with the decoration because they hadn't figured out an aileron drag at that stage. So you put some aileron, you go to angle left and it turns right. So it's like a tiger walk with a fun tiger walk. Is you basically steer with your rudders and guns to the ailerons. It's got 90 horsepower. Look at the drag coefficient. So, I mean, it's a delightful little thing to fly, but it really only just flies. The super, it goes like a startled rabbit. 40 seconds from start of takeoff roll to 1,000 feet. That's pretty amazing. And it's nice short wings. Just compare the wings on that compared to the other wing. It's got great roll authority. It's a little bit pitchy, but it's a bit short, but it really does perform. It first flew in 1980, I think, in the States when it was built. And I've got pictures of the first test pilot looping it and rolling it. And of all these aeroplanes, it's the only one which, if you were stupid, you try to loop and roll. Probably this group, the Scout, is my favourite. It's light, it's just light as a feather on controls, it performs quite nicely, it doesn't appear to have any devices, it flies like an aeroplane. Is it answer the question? Any others? Yes?
Frank, I was Spitfire, I read a lot about Spitfire, and which are apparently, according to what I read, is built one of the finest aircraft ever to fly. As a pilot on the Spitfire, which you do.
Christian is the Spitfire, the nicest aeroplane that's ever built. I'm Huey British. So, I guess that exotic stuff that I fly is I'm most at home in the Kitty Hawk, because I fly in the Kitty Hawk the most. And I like in the Kitty Hawk to a big harbour, which is appropriate for today. It's about 1.5 times the weight, 1.5 times the power, and about 1.5 times the performance. And the ergonomics are very similar, the control field is very similar, and it flies like an aeroplane should. The Spitfire is quintessentially British. If you look in the cockpit, we've got a gauge where we're going. The boost gauge, for example, one of the most important gauges in the cockpit, is the smallest, and it's stuck over in the corner where you, The control harmony is not very good. It's quite heavy on the ailerons and absolutely finger right on the elevators. Normally we like nice light ailerons and a little bit of feel in the elevators. So, however, it's a Spitfire. If you really want to get honest, you get the Mustang, and I remember writing a story once about Mustangs. There's a reason why Mustang pilots have a bit of a smile on their face. It is just, everything's perfect about it. Its ergonomics are good, its feel is good, its performance is good, and it's easy to land. What more do you want? What then is the football? It's so I liken the Kitty Hawk as a sports car, the Spitfire is a British sports car, and the Football is a rally car. It rattles and bangs and clatters, and it's bloody awful. Well, thank you. I hope today's been a good day for you. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves, and thanks for coming to New Zealand Walkers.
Thank you, Frank.